Seems to be so many things that had happened in the past week. Also, maybe when we look back the past 4 years, especially in our country, and how it affects the entire world. This is last week, along with the COVID pandemic, which just started almost a year ago, and is taking a huge toll. A death, many, many people. I think it shows the ignorance and stupidity of what people, how they think. What are they doing? What are they thinking about? The Georgia election, we got 2 more Democrats in the Senate. Proclamation of President-elect, the ceremony. I never thought about the ceremony that took place in the Capitol is like the temple of democracy, which was violated. That was a tragedy. I felt violated. It was a tragedy and people were killed. And then just the other day, Sojourner Weissman died. You know, so some very good things and some very bad and sad things. Still, Sonoma Mountain forever stands tall. The valley stream of the moon. See, you know, it comes down to like, how long can you live? And someday you will die, and someday I will die. And how will we die? And when I look around, the Zen practice or Buddhist practice is not doing well, I don't think. There's a word I want to introduce, bodhicitta. I use the word resolve for many years. You have to have a resolve to practice. Bodhicitta is that very thing. It's high resolve of practice. And let's see, bodhicitta, you could say, is karuna. It's great love for people's suffering, for other suffering, and not just other suffering, our own suffering. Because if you look closely, just like Thich Nhat Hanh said, look into your own suffering. And I kind of dismissed that when I heard that, but when you look closely, you are suffering and the whole world is suffering. And that's the beginning, the awakening and resolve of bodhicitta. It's your great love that you want to help you extend what you know, not by reading, but the insight you have within yourself. You want to extend that harmonious thing. Even the world is upside down now. Today is a bright, sunny day. You could turn off the news anytime you want. That's the power of Zazen. You could turn it on, you could turn it off. You know, Zazen is the most revolutionary thing that humanity, that the Buddha brought forth, and he did it with great effort, great effort. So I look down at my notes and it says, arousing the thought of enlightenment. And how did you start? How did everyone start here? There was a thought, an arousal, a thought, or a wish, or help, altruistically, of enlightenment. And in the olden times, it was compared to, I think it was the Avatam Saka Sutra, a herder. Three ways. They related it to a herd. When you have a herd, they go first, and you enter after you've herded your flock in. The three things. And then the second one is that it's like a ferry boat person. After the ferry crosses the river and docks, everyone gets off all together. And the third one is the king. The king, not a dictator, but an altruistic king, a monarch, that he or she realizes enlightenment. And not just for him or herself, but for the benefit of all the people, for the benefit of all people. So everyone has the same mother. We are not different. Delusion has the same mother. Enlightenment has the same mother. There's no enemy out there except yourself. Bodhicitta. So Bodhi, of course, is like kaku. Kaku means enlightenment, arousing the thought or the aspiration for enlightenment. And that enlightenment or that thought is never greater than even 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, if you have bodhicitta, if you continue to practice. And, you know, when people study Buddhism, I don't like it to call it like Buddhism because it's an ism, it's an idea or belief system. But I like to use the word Buddha Dharma, the awakened truth, the awakened law, the awakened universe. And so when people studied it, they saw the suffering in the world. And maybe, in those days, it was more direct. You could see it firsthand everywhere. But nowadays, we had technology that kind of protected, covered us from all these things. But all these things, it cannot but come back on us like climate change. We thought we were doing good by making more things, producing things, getting it out to people. But we forgot the wisdom and compassion of those economical things. It wasn't just the money, cause and effect. So technology's spared us for a while, but what I want to say is that the time we live in now is no different than the time before. Corpses back on the rivers, there was epidemic, there were wars. So what's new? The same thing humanity's been faced with ever since the Buddha appeared: greed, violence, and ignorance. Those were the three evils that mankind has not got its hand around, because that what makes this world what it is, or what it could be, what is possible. And Buddha or Siddhartha understood what karma was, but he didn't know how to communicate what impermanency was. The actual world we live in is not permanent. And that's what people live. People live and are taught and thrive in the world of condition. The world's not permanent. Look what's happening. And that's why the Dharma is so great, because it lives from the world of impermanency. Not always so. We cannot predict anything. It's not always so. What you did last time may not happen the same thing again, because it's not always so. Anyway, so I remember Sasaki Roshi in the book about Tathagata Zen. He mentions that when people study Buddhism, they think of it like a college course. It's objective material you're studying, but the material is imparted. Imparted material. There's a transmission that people don't even know anything about. Even Zen people to this very day don't know anything about. There's a transmission of the teachings, which with bodhicitta you begin to awake to. So the Four Noble Truths was a great discovery when Siddhartha became Buddha. And now he had to go live outside the palace to find out for himself. When he saw life as it is, he saw death, he saw sickness, he saw suffering, he saw it all. Most of us probably, I mean, when you go to India or you go to the slums, you see how people live. And you see that the suffering is great. And how does this sitting zazen apply? How do we practice it to ourselves and our world and the worldview? It's not just written 2,000, nearly 600 years ago. It's for every time, any time, because it's not man-made. So it's interesting. In the dictionary, the Buddhist dictionary, I saw the word, I looked up the Four Noble Truths. My memory is not so good. I can't even tell you what the Eightfold Path is. I know one is meditation. But anyway, the Four Noble Truths is very important. The word noble is extremely important. There's a definition of noble that I just found. It's called Arya, A-R-Y-A, noble. Not to the truths of the Four Noble Truths, which are, what is it? Cessation of suffering. Oh, wait, it's the cessation, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, desire, attachment, cessation of suffering. You know, suffering can end. And you have to do your, what is suffering? Everyone suffers. And how do they suffer? There is a cessation to suffering. And the last one, of course, is the path. Things you do, the way you live. But coming back to noble, it's not about the truths. It's not about the Four Noble Truths. You know what it's about? It's who understands them. Who understands the noble truths and practice the insight of that reality. That's what noble means. It's not by human beings. It's not by regular people. Noble means that you have the insight to the Four Noble Truths. And that's what noble means. Noble is a great word. You have the insight. You're actualizing the Four Noble Truths. It isn't a text. It isn't a course in Buddhism. It's the real thing. And it goes along. I think last time I mentioned something about the word dhyana. And when I started studying the Dharma, probably about more than 50 years ago, dhyana I thought was Zen meditation, but dhyana is not. Dhyana is pre-Aborigine India. It came from, and they taught dhyana to everybody. And it was a means to focus, concentrate to a single point. That's dhyana. But that's not our practice. Our practice is zazen. It's different than dhyana. We have that. You have to have that focus. How is your focus? When you go to the city, you stand on a street corner, can you count all the stories up without having your mind deviate? Or when you look in a dictionary for a word and your mind wanders off to another word, you end up looking for another word, which ends up into another word, and another word ends up to another word. Isn't that how it works? It's true, but it's not a sin. But this is about what happens in our life. And so so the Buddha predicted that the reality of shunyata, emptiness, would be lost. And I think it may be even lost now. And it wasn't until Nagarjuna, one of our ancestors, great ancestor, we discovered. And the legend was that he had to dive down to the ocean bottom. And Buddha entrusted it to the dragon who was Ryu, who was at the bottom of the sea in his mouth. Held it in his mouth, but Naga had the courage and the bodhicitta. He had bodhicitta, and he dove down and he went to the mouth and pulled it out and brought it back up. And this was like 2nd century Naga. He was great. And for many, many years, I looked for the definition of emptiness. First, I'm thinking of the definition, but second, I didn't know how to transmit it or convey it without words. This is not a glitch in Zoom. So I finally adopted Nagas. He's a serpent. And when we began working on the Sonoma Mandala, we had a ceremony, and we asked the Nagas, they live under the ground. We asked the Nagas if they gave us permission to move, to build a mandala on Sonoma Mountain. And so we waited for his or her reply. They didn't say anything, so I guess it's okay. So we came, but it's interesting. Some of you know the story already, but I think it's quite interesting because this is how we exist here. 1 month before our ceremony, Sterling Bonnell's son, Seth, brought a snake that they had raised. Sterling was the owner of the land. And anyway, it was a 4 feet long, black and white king snake. And they eat rattlesnakes. So he asked if he could put the Naga in our land. And I was very happy that the Naga came. And I think there was a rock band that Mr. Morris, the snake was that I forgot the name of the rock band, but anyway, the song was Mr. Morris and was about a snake. So we named it, we blessed the snake, Mr. Morris, and we chanted the Heart Sutra. And as soon as we finished chanting, you could see its tail disappear into the grass. So that was a blessing for us. And then we had the ceremony a month later. Anyway, this Naga, and Naga Juna, he says, for shunyata, the absence of intrinsic or independent existence. Intrinsic or independent existence means permanency, means Atman, means self. It means your own being exists independent, self-centered from everything else. In other words, it is the expression of the fundamental interrelatedness. We all have the same mother. It's the fundamental interrelatedness of all things and experiences. Shunyata. I mentioned this before. Shunyata is also dependent or origination. Those are big words. Dependent origination or dependent co-arising. It's about cause and effect. I call this the 4 whens, WHEN. And I've explained whens many times, is the vertical, the absolute, meeting the relative, the horizontal. Right when they meet is when, okay? Okay, when there is this, meaning the I am, the self-centered, the Atman. When there is this, there is that, the objective world, all separated, subject and object separate. Maybe I just read this first and then I'll add. When there is this, there is that. When when this appears, that appears. When there's not this. When there is no longer that, there is no longer this. That's being free from the Atman. That's shunyata. It's pretty simple, isn't it? but difficult to do. What's the saying? What a 3-year-old can utter, an 80-year-old man can't do. So that when again, when there's this self-centeredness or this independent or this own existence, when there's this, the self-centeredness, there is that, the objective world. We're separated. So when this appears, the I am, when this I am, the conditioned self appears, there's that world appears. They're dependent on each other. This is how they originate. Then, when there's not that, there is not this. This is a logic, actually. And then when there is no longer that, there is no longer this. I am not. The phrase, how long can you live, is a very important phrase for all of us. When the late Mayazumi Roshi died, they asked me to be one of the main speakers at his funeral. So we arrived at the Zen Center in Los Angeles, and it was a very hot day, I remember. And at the same time we got out of the car, his brother got out of the car, but I didn't know who he was. So we went into the Inryu, and we sat at a very long table, and we were given a little treat, some cold beer. So as I was drinking my beer, his brother asked me, how long can you live? And I said, you're, like, turn around, are you asking me? And then I got up with my beer. I went over to him and I clinked his glass. That was it. Thank you very much. Long live the Dharma.